So my name is Caleb Mann, and I will be presenting on naturalism in the movie Contact, which was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who directed some other famous films such as the Back to the Future trilogy. He directed The Polar Express, and he directed Forrest Gump. Some of the screenwriters were Michael Goldberg, James Hart, and John Burgess was the cinematographer. So this movie is actually about a scientist whose name is Dr. Eleanor Arroway, who's played by Jodie Foster, and she's obsessed with finding life in space. She has a team of scientists made up of Dr. Drumlin, who's played by Tom Skerritt, and Kent, who's played by William Fichtner, who work in this field of astronomy studying radio transmissions from space. And they're specifically looking for signals of life from other planets in hope of being able to prove that there are other species out there. But one of her biggest struggles is finding money and finding financial support to buy time on the radio arrays. So she at first receives some anonymous support, who is later revealed to be from S.R. Haddon. And she buys time on these radio arrays and receives a transmission from the Vega star system. And that transmission is all of the prime numbers from 0 to 100 in sequential order. And it also contains a video of Hitler, which they thought was odd, since they realized that that was the first transmission that was powerful enough to make it to space. And so they sent it back in the sense of saying, we heard you. But encoded in that signal was plans to build this interstellar travel device. And no one's really sure how it works. And they kind of question whether or not it's a good idea to build it. But ultimately they decide they should and set out on building this. And turns out to be a multi-billion-dollar project. And while they're doing that, all of the scientists from around the world who are working on it are kind of put through a series of tests to decide who's the best one to send in this device to what they would assume would be the Vega system. Arroway is not selected at first to go, but ultimately ends up being the one who goes because the first choice dies actually in a terrorist attack on the device they're building. When she travels there, she's met by this alien race who disguise themselves as her father to make the interaction more easy on her, so to speak. And she converses with them a little bit and then travels back. But when she gets back, it appears that no time has passed on Earth, and it looks like the machine just went right through, and no one truly believes that she was there. The camera that she was wearing only recorded static, and the only person who actually believes her is her friend, and who's a writer and a religious advocate named Palmer Joss, who's played by Matthew McConaughey. So there's a very strong in this film, obviously, some very clear naturalist viewpoints, but also a lot of advocates for religion. And the primary naturalist is going to be Dr. Arroway, and we'll see why in just a moment. But there's also a strong case for religion, specifically, I think, some Kierkegaardian existentialism as it applies to religion. And I think we see that a little bit personified by Palmer Joss, and we see some back and forth a little bit between them in the movie. So Arroway is kind of the main proponent for naturalism in the movie, and she's the only one who's really displayed as an atheist. And she repeatedly throughout the movie, over and over, and she really emphasizes that God is not real. There is no need for God, and that in a very naturalist sense, that her view is that truth can be found by observing the world around us. There is no need for God. We simply created him. Even to the point where they argue that 97% of the world is religious, so they think it might be wise to send someone religious to represent humanity. And so she even, to the point of costing her that opportunity, argues that there is no God. And at first it does, and it appears that she won't be able to go. But her ultimate perspective is that we rather find truth from the world around us and from observing reality and what we see, and even suggests that we made up God in one scene. And so in that scene, she's arguing with actually Palmer Joss, that friend of hers, and she suggests that the reason we made him up was simply to give us kind of a purpose and to make us feel like we weren't alone, that there's a lot of empty space and it can be lonely. And it's actually alluded back to later when she's discussing with the aliens. What they say is that the only thing that makes the emptiness bearable for them is making contact with these other species. And it references back to what Arroway suggested and kind of confirms kind of what she said, as naturalism is the first really atheist view we see, and it's preceded by deism and theism. But both of those are dominated by the belief in some deity, the predominant one being Christian. But the point Arroway is making is that we simply kind of manifested a God for us so that we would feel like we have a purpose. And but what she would argue is that our purpose comes from the world around us, that we understand truth and reality by observing the world around us, not by what parameters God has set for us, and we don't actually need him. And then the aliens saying that almost kind of confirms that and alludes back to it later. But we also see a little bit less explicit of an allusion to naturalism in that alien race. So on the Vega system, the aliens actually tell her that they didn't create the device, they didn't design it, they simply found it. And the phrase they used for the creatures who did create it was that they had moved on. We don't know specifically what happened to them when the as we'll call them vegans, because they're from the Vega system, got there. They had just found the device with no creator. Is it possible that that Zemeckis is actually alluding to kind of a Darwinian standpoint there? What if they left because they couldn't adapt to their new surroundings? Or what if they were extinct ultimately because they didn't adapt? There's no explicit statement of that in the movie, but it is a possibility. And so I think it's just one that's worth considering, that maybe he's alluding a little bit to a Darwinian naturalist perspective there. And the other way he does that is the aliens also say, when Arroway's all excited and a little bit in shock, she wants to bring back humanity and show them, bring back more people. But what the aliens tell her is that they can't. They must find their way there on their own. And the phrase they use is small steps. And that's a very Darwinist concept of species evolved over small steps and got where we are today. Now, that could be another sort of jab at evolutionary naturalism, in that we take small steps to get to where we're ready to come back to that Vega system, in a sense. On the flip side, we have Palmer Jost, who is a very strong advocate for religion throughout the movie, and he plays almost a Kierkegaardian role. He has a lot of similarities there throughout the film. And the reason I say that is, at every opportunity, he emphasizes faith. His faith is very important to him. And at the beginning of the movie, when he meets Dr. Arroway, he's a writer, and his goal is to emphasize that science and faith don't need to be in opposition. And there's a lot of emphasis on that. But what he argues is that there doesn't need to be, and even takes and really emphasizes that we can take a leap of faith, as Kierkegaard might call it, and believe in things that we don't find evidence for, even when we can't see them. And so one of the ways we see this is in that debate where Arroway suggests that we created God. He asks Arroway if she loved her father, who had died early in her life and was actually what inspired her to get to study for aliens. And she says she can't. And what he's suggesting is that just as we can't prove that God exists, we can't necessarily prove our emotions, you know? And so some things just need to be accepted to be true, with or without proof. And so what Palmer's suggesting is that we have to have a little bit of faith sometimes. And why can't we have faith in a God? Because the way he puts it, he can't imagine living in a world where God doesn't exist. And another way he shows that kind of that faith in the reality around him, and takes a leap of faith, as Kierkegaard called it, is that he's the only one who really advocates for Arroway when she comes back and says she'd actually gone to the Vega system and talked to these vegans. I don't know if they eat meat, but he's the only one who believes her. The camera doesn't record. It appears that the device they made just falls right through the machine and it doesn't work. But she saw all these things, and he's the only one who believes her. He's the only one who steps out and takes a leap of faith to say that maybe she's telling the truth. And so, all in all, I think this was a really good movie. I enjoyed watching it. If you like sci-fi films about space travel, science, and aliens, it's one that you could really enjoy. But we definitely see some naturalist undertones where emphasis is taken off of religion, and that we can interpret reality through the lens of the world around us, and we just understand that reality, and we, by learning about that, can we come to terms with truth. But also on the flip side, there's also this really well presented counter argument of we need to have faith sometimes, but we need to take a leap of faith to understand some of the things that we don't understand and just accept them to be true. And I would argue that even Arroway takes a little bit of that leap of faith when she gets on the machine, because no one truly knows how it works in the movie, but they're building it anyways. And she chooses to go despite being uncertain of how it works. But definitely a fascinating movie, would really recommend it. And thanks for listening.